Imagine paying dues to keep your neighborhood nice. And then, finding out your own HOA president is trying to steal your family's home. What would you do if a clipboard and a smile could ruin your life until the state's top cop walked into your kitchen? My name is Rex Holloway. After my divorce, I moved into my grandfather's old lake cabin in a quiet corner of Michigan. 2 and a smidge acres of pines. A skinny dock that creaked like an old porch swing. And cedar walls that still carried the scent of sawdust and Old Spice. He built it after Korea with his own hands. You know, every nail felt like a memory. I wanted peace. Instead, I met Karen Wickshire. Late 50s. Ironed khakis. Plastic smile. That little tilt of the chin that says the rules are for you. Not me. She's the kind of neighbor who measures your grass with a ruler and calls it community pride. The first time she knocked, she did not even look up, just shoved a stack of paper at me like a process server. Courtesy notice. She chirped. You're in violation on 47 items. 47. I blinked. Ma'am, I just moved in last week. Previous occupancy is irrelevant, she said. And I swear her teeth squeaked. All properties must comply within 30 days, or the board files a lien. She listed them off like an auctioneer dock, too long. Fire pit unpermitted. Shutters the wrong shade of quote. Rustic taupe. Fees of $500, plus $75 a day until full compliance. When I pointed to the dated photos on the wall, my granddad flipping burgers on that same slab of stone, she now called an unapproved combustion structure. Karen gave me that frost-thin smile. Board doesn't recognize legacy installations, she said. And then she wrote something extra at the bottom, like she was signing a birthday card. That night, I drove into town and dug through county records. You ever sit under buzzing fluorescent lights, fingers turning gray with old paper dust, and feel the traps start to show? I found the HOA formation documents. They were filed 3 months after my grandfather died, and his signature was on them, except it wasn't. The swirls of the R and the H were wrong. Anyone in the family could have told you that. The ink was fresh. The notary's stamp sloppy. And the developer's adult son sat on the current board. Not a mistake, this looked like a plan. I went home with my head hot and my hands shaking. Okay, I said to the empty cabin. They picked the wrong old man's grandson. So I started documenting. Cameras on the eaves. A simple folder system on my laptop. Every letter scanned. Every call recorded, where the law allowed. I told myself to keep my voice even. Keep my steps slow. And keep my heart steady. A week later, at 6:30 in the morning, Karen marched onto my lot with a surveyor in a neon vest and a local tire guy named Dale, trudging along like his boots weighed a ton. They poked at property stakes, snapped pictures through my windows, and argued about inches. The surveyor, a lanky kid named Jimmy, muttered that my dock jutted 3.2 feet too far. And Karen said, "Round up. Board policy." "Board policy," I said. "Or Karen policy," she pretended not to hear. Jimmy's hands were shaking when he signed his measurement sheet. Later, over coffee at the diner, he leaned close and whispered, "She only paid me half. Told me to, find something." He glanced at the door, like Karen might burst in through the coat rack. "If I tell what she did, can you, help me get my money? I can testify." That afternoon, my cameras caught Jimmy relieving himself behind my shed look. Not a crime against humanity. But when I told Karen, she went nuclear. Health code violation, she shrieked, waving her clipboard like a sword. I said sure, but maybe she'd explain why she hired him in the first place. It would have been funny if she hadn't already filed a suit for $12,000 and pushed to shut down my dock while the court sorted things out. She called me a dangerous, unstable veteran at Murphy's Diner. People who have never served like to use words like unstable when they want you quiet. That mouth of hers became my best witness. Every slander, every whisper campaign, every late-night email asking neighbors to stay vigilant, I saved it all. I hired a lawyer out of Grand Rapids named Stella Crawford, a property bulldog who smiles like a Sunday school teacher and cross-examines like a chainsaw. Over black coffee, she said. Michigan's got statutes that let private citizens act when there's systemic fraud. If we prove this HOA was formed dirty, and that Karen's been abusing her authority, we can blow the doors off. She tapped the folder with the fake signature. Oh, and your cabin predates this HOA by decades. If the judge agrees, their rules might not touch you at all. At the next HOA meeting, I showed up in a clean flannel and calm eyes. The room smelled like citrus cleaner and fear. Dale, the tire guy, bless him, raised his hand and said he'd always thought the formation paperwork was kinda sketchy. You could hear the oxygen leave Karen's lungs. People started murmuring. Martha, a widow with hands like garden soil, said Karen made her rip out the roses her husband planted 40 years ago. The Afghanistan vet, 2 doors down, Tom, admitted he kept his blinds closed because, man, I'm more afraid of Karen's tape measure than I ever was of mortars. The young family with twins, fined for chalk drawings across their own concrete. Patterns have weight. Once you see one, you can't unsee it. Karen doubled down. Daily compliance checks. Phone calls to my mortgage company. Turns out her brother-in-law worked there. Anonymous environmental complaints. I found her crouched in my lilac bushes at 9 o'clock at night, whispering into her phone like a spy who forgot her lines. My daughter, Liz, called from college. Voice tight. Dad, be careful. Okay, my ex-wife texted about tuition and legal fees. I felt the old shame that shows up when you're trying to be strong for everyone. But I also felt my grandfather at my shoulder steady. Quiet. Stubborn as oak. That's when the money trail cracked. Stella subpoenaed bank statements. $67,000 missing from HOA reserves. A chunk of it flowed to a property management shell no one had ever seen manage a property. Another chunk landed in the account of Karen's son, who'd flamed out on a restaurant that lasted about as long as a rain puddle. There were casino withdrawals. There were consulting fees paid to the board treasurer for consultations that never happened. And there was a reimbursement for rose garden enhancement that made me snort coffee through my nose. Then came the fish. One night my cameras caught Karen sneaking onto my lot with a big black trash bag. She wore pink gardening gloves. Because of course she did. She dumped the bag by my septic tank and hustled off. The next morning, an anonymous tip sent the county out. The inspector wrinkled his nose and said, "Smells like Friday fish fry." We split open the bag with the camera rolling. It was literal fried fish from Murphy's Diner. Breading and all. Karen's face went a shade of cottage cheese I had not seen before. She tried to blame local teens, which, sorry, made even the inspector laugh. A week later, Jimmy's older brother, Danny, a small-time private investigator Karen had hired, knocked on my door. He looked tired of himself. "She asked me to plant evidence," he said, sliding a thumb drive across the table. Said I'd get a bonus if it stuck. I'm done. The audio was crystal clear. You'd think a cornered person would calm down. Not Karen. She filed a false police report saying I'd threatened to use my, quote, military skills. The officer who came out watched a few minutes of my collected footage and sighed. Keep documenting. She's sorry, he told me. People like this undo themselves. Then Channel 7 rolled up my gravel drive. Karen had given them a story about a violent veteran terrorizing a peaceful neighborhood. I opened my door, set out coffee, and handed the reporter a neatly labeled archive that would make a librarian proud. They aired it that night, but not how Karen planned. The headline was, "When the HOA becomes the bully," and the phones lit up. Victims from across the state started emailing. A Facebook group sprouted overnight, then turned into a real-world coffee club at my cabin, where folks shared their stories and scanned paperwork into a shared drive. Stella sifted evidence with the focus of a jeweler inspecting a diamond. The state attorney general's office reached out. An investigator asked for copies of the deeds, the formation documents, the bank statements, and the fish fiasco footage. We scheduled a meeting. The morning of the meeting, I found my grandfather's old army trunk in the attic. Beneath medals and letters lay a brittle envelope. Inside was the original deed from 1960, hand-drawn boundary lines. My granddad's real signature, plain as day. Turns out, our property stretched 40 feet farther toward the water than the county map showed, which meant Karen's prized rose garden and gazebo on my land. I sat on the floor with that deed in my lap until the sun shifted across the boards. "Granddad," I whispered, "you just saved us again." That afternoon, the state attorney general, Santos, a woman with a voice like warm steel, stepped into my kitchen. We shook hands. I started to explain the maze, but I didn't have to. She'd been briefed. She'd seen the documents. "We are investigating," she said, crisp and calm. "You did the right thing." And then, the front door blew inward like a western saloon. Karen stormed in, with her clipboard held like a shield, yelling about immediate compliance. She was halfway through. "You are in clear violation," when she noticed the badge on my counter. Attorney General Santos did not raise her voice. "Ma'am," she said, "you just committed trespass, and potentially worse. In front of the chief law enforcement officer of this state. I need you to wait outside while we discuss your criminal exposure." Karen's mouth opened and closed without sound. Then her face went the color of printer paper. She turned, took 2 wrong steps like her feet forgot the floor, and stumbled out to the porch. I heard her phone dialing furiously. My camera, yep, still rolling. Inside, Santos took the thumb drive from Danny, reviewed the fish footage, the false report audio, the bank statements, the forged signature comparisons, and the deed lines. When she saw the rose garden on my land, a small, tired smile flickered. "People get bold when they think nobody's watching," she said. "Well, you watched." Word got out fast. Some board members resigned over email, blaming stress and misunderstandings. The treasurer, a guy who wore a flag pin and an unearned smirk, tried to slide town for a fishing trip. If you can believe it, he did not make it past the county line before a pair of unmarked sedans made small talk with him on the shoulder. Meanwhile, our little coffee club grew. Folks brought binders. They brought receipts. They brought the kind of stories you only tell when you know someone actually cares. Martha dug out a photo of her husband kneeling in front of those old roses, his hands in the dirt. Her voice wobbled when she said Karen made her tear them out because the trellis was, quote, non-conforming. Tom admitted he slept with a fan running to drown out the sound of Karen's car pausing in front of his house at night. We built timelines. We mapped the money. We cross-checked signatures. We filed affidavits. We did the slow, boring, righteous work that bullies hope you won't do. Karen, for her part, tried one last burst of chaos. She set a teen up to dump motor oil by my dock, then called the county again. The kid, scared and 17, showed up at my porch the next day with his mother. He handed me $40 cash and a shaking apology. She said it was just a prank. He mumbled. I told him to keep the money and keep his head high. His mom squeezed my hand until my knuckles popped. Channel 7 came back for a follow-up. The reporter stood beside my woodpile while Martha told the camera about her roses. And Tom talked about the chalk drawings on the sidewalk that made him feel like the neighborhood still had kids' laughter in it. You can't find laughter, he said. And, I swear I saw the cameraman blink hard. A week later, just before dawn, a convoy of law enforcement vehicles rolled into Karen's cul-de-sac. They knocked politely. When she did not answer, they knocked less politely. She came out in curler-crushed hair and that same clipboard clutched like a teddy bear. Dale the tire guy stood in his bathrobe across the street, hands stuffed into the pockets, eyes wide. The treasurer was picked up at the campground, barefoot, standing in muddy grass like a man who'd run out of road. The surveyor boys were called in for interviews. The bank's compliance officer started emailing the state like a printer jam. Charges were filed. Embezzlement, forgery, fraud, conspiracy. A laundry list long enough to hang on a clothesline. The board tried to hold an emergency meeting without a quorum. It lasted 8 minutes and achieved exactly nothing. In court, Karen's attorney argued that she had merely enthusiastically enforced community standards. The judge, gray hair, heavy eyebrows, asked why enthusiasm required a secret account and a garden on someone else's deed. Karen tried to cry at the right moments, but her tears had the timing of a bad actor. Stella sat beside me, scribbling notes without looking down, like she could write in her sleep. Our counterclaim landed hard: fraudulent formation, elder abuse by way of bilking widows and the elderly, harassment, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and trespass. Stella asked the court to recognize my grandfather's deed and to declare my property outside the reach of the HOA. When the old paper with a clean signature met the newer paper with the sloppy one, even the judge leaned forward. The Attorney General's office filed a separate action to freeze the HOA's accounts and appoint a receiver. Suddenly, the people who had stayed silent for fear of fines had a place to bring their receipts. You could feel the mood shift, like weather breaking after a long storm. Neighbors who hadn't waved in years started lingering on sidewalks. Kids chalked stars and hopscotch on driveways, and nobody yelled about it. Dogs barked, and nobody called them a noise nuisance. For the first time since I moved in, I felt the neighborhood exhale. The hearing where it all crested took place on a wet Tuesday. The courtroom smelled like old books and damp wool. I wore my best jacket. Karen wore contrition like a costume that did not quite fit. She stared at me like I was a puzzle she'd forgotten how to solve. Stella put Jimmy on the stand. He admitted to the rounded-up measurements and the pressure. He looked the judge in the eye and said, "I'm sorry." Danny followed with the audio of Karen, promising a bonus for planted evidence. The clip, where she said, "Find something or make it up," echoed in that big room like a bell. Then Stella called me. She asked simple questions. I answered slow. I told the court about my grandfather's hands, about the cedar smell, about how hope can turn into fear when someone with a clipboard decides you're their hobby. I did not raise my voice. I didn't need to. Finally, Stella walked to the easel with a blown-up map of the property lines. She layered the old deed over the county map. The overlap put Karen's rose garden and gazebo squarely on my side. There was a rustle in the gallery as people leaned in. Karen's attorney objected on 3 different grounds, and then on vibes alone. Overruled. 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 The judge ruled from the bench. The HOA, as formed, was dissolved. A receiver would calculate restitution. The cabin, built before the HOA and protected by the original deed, stood outside any future association's reach. Karen's rose garden and gazebo would be removed or transferred at my discretion. And the criminal case, that would proceed on its own track. The judge's eyebrows made an extra point of that. I walked out into rain that felt like a blessing. Martha hugged me so tight my ribs squeaked. Tom clapped me on the back and said, "You held the line." Even Dale the tire guy shuffled over and admitted he should have spoken up sooner. "I was scared," he said. "We all were." I told him, "Fear is normal. Silence is optional." After the dust settled, the neighborhood did something wild. It became a community again. We took the old compliance sign off the clubhouse wall and replaced it with a hand-painted board that said, "Neighbors, not hall monitors." The receiver met with the victims at folding tables under strings of lights. Checks went out. Gardens came back. A dozen flags reappeared on porches without anyone measuring the height of the poles. My daughter came home for a weekend, and we sat at the edge of the dock with our feet in the water. "I'm proud of you, Dad," she said, then added, "Don't let it go to your head." We laughed, the kind of laugh that feels like release. She asked about Grandpa's trunk, and we went through it together. Letters that smelled like attic. A photo of him grinning beside the half-built cabin. A pack of cards bound with twine. She traced his name with her finger. "He'd like what you did." I kept the cameras up, not because I expected more trouble, but because truth has a funny way of keeping peace when it knows it might be needed. Plus, I'll be honest, it comforted the neighbors to know we had receipts for everything now. We turned Karen's rose garden into something better. I offered her 2 choices: through the receiver transplant the roses to her new rental when she got out on bail, or let us repurpose the space as a community plot. She chose anger by refusing to choose at all. So the receiver chose for her. We built raised beds, lined them with cedar, and planted tomatoes, oregano, and sunflowers. Martha placed a small stone with her husband's initials at the corner. Tom rigged a rain barrel. Kids came with tiny shovels and dirt under their nails. Every time a tomato ripened, someone would say, "That's $1 less Karen can find." And we'd all laugh. Channel 7 filmed a final segment under the new pergola that the neighborhood built in a weekend, no permits required. Just common sense and a tape measure used for building, not policing. The reporter asked what I'd say to people in other neighborhoods who feel stuck. I said I ain't sorry. I am not a lawyer, but I know bullies fold when sunlight hits them. Document. Organize. Find the one person brave enough to go first. Then go second for them. And if you find a deed in an attic, make copies before you tell a soul. The criminal trial happened later. Slower. The way those things do. I sat through parts of it with Martha on one side and Tom on the other. Karen's attorney tried to sell the jury a story about a woman overwhelmed by responsibility. A victim of overzealous perfectionism. The state told a simpler story she stole. She lied. She broke into my house while the Attorney General stood in my kitchen and told her to wait outside. The jury needed less than a day. The judge sentenced Karen to 5 years. The treasurer got less, but not by much. There were fines. There was restitution. There were lessons that probably won't reach the next Karen in the next town. But they reached us here. On the day Karen was led away, her clipboard fell from her hands and skittered across the courthouse step. It landed at my boots. I could have kicked it into the gutter. I picked it up and handed it to the bailiff instead. Evidence, I said. The bailiff nodded. We don't need trophies where I live. Just quiet water and honest paper. We kept meeting on Saturday mornings. The coffee club turned into a veterans retreat weekend every few months. Tom runs fishing trips at dawn. His voice low and steady as he helps guys tie lines with fingers that have trembled for too long. Martha runs the garden schedule and brings cinnamon rolls that could make a judge smile. The twins who drew chalk across their driveway now paint small rocks and hide them around the neighborhood for others to find. Dale shows up early, apologizing less every time. Always lugging coolers of ice and offering to patch anybody's tire for free if they bring donuts. Sometimes, late, I sit on the dock with a mug and watch the moon scuff along the lake. The cabin creaks, and I swear I can hear my grandfather clear his throat. Karen's gazebo is gone, where it stood. The grass is tender and new. The sound I live by now is not a car idling in judgment, but kids running, a dog's collar jingling, and water knocking lightly against the dock's posts. If you've read this far, maybe you're in a fight of your own. Maybe it's an HOA, or a landlord, or some small-time tyrant with a badge they printed at home. Maybe your hands shake, and your voice wobbles, and you wonder if you're the problem. You are not. People like Karen count on you being tired. They count on you believing you're alone. You ain't sorry, are not alone. Here's what I learned, and I'm gonna say it plain. One paper matters. Keep it. Scan it. Back it up. A bully's story collapses when the receipts show up. 2 neighbors matter. Talk to each other. Shame grows in the dark. Truth grows at folding tables with cheap coffee and someone nodding at the right time. 3. Don't let them hurry you. Bullies weaponize urgency. Breathe. Read. Ask questions. The law moves slow for a reason, so it can be sure. 4. Find your deed. Literal or otherwise. The thing that proves what's yours. Who you are. Where your lines run. Sometimes it's a map. Sometimes it's a memory. Sometimes it's a daughter telling you she's proud. 5. When justice comes, let it take root. Don't replace one kind of control with another. Make space for gardens and flags and chalk. Make space for mistakes. You don't fix a neighborhood with more clipboards. You fix it with more chairs. I thought my battle was about a dock, a fire pit, a ridiculous shade of taupe. It was really about dignity, about not letting one person decide who belongs and who doesn't, about not letting grief losing my marriage, losing my granddad turn into silence. Karen tried to turn my home into a ledger. She forgot it was a story. My granddad built this place with boards and hope. I kept it with a camera, a binder, a stubborn streak, and friends who became family while we were all scared together. So tell me, what would you do if your HOA nightmare knocked on your door and barged into your kitchen? Would you stand up? Or would you try to keep your head down and hope it passes? Anyone else had a HOA do this to you? Drop your story down below. Somebody out there needs your courage tonight.